Over the past few weeks, something about Michael, my old buddy from college, started feeling off. His bright purple Chevrolet kept popping up near my house in Los Angeles every evening, like clockwork. At first, I brushed it off, figured it was just a coincidence, maybe he was in the area or swinging by out of habit. But as the days passed, it became clear that this wasn't just a random occurrence. Each night, right around sunset, I'd see his car roll into the parking lot across from my house, always in the same spot. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, until I started noticing a pattern. More than once, my wife, Emily, would quietly slip out of the house and head straight toward his car. The timing was eerily precise, almost like they were working off a set schedule. One particular evening, my suspicions got the better of me. I parked my own car a short distance away, far enough to stay unnoticed, but close enough to see everything. Right on cue, Michael's unmistakable purple Chevy pulled up, standing out like a neon sign against the dimming sky. Moments later, Emily stepped out of the house. But this time, something about her was different. She looked uneasy, her eyes darting around, scanning the street before she made her way to the curb. I watched as she reached her car, her movements careful, controlled. Then, without a word, she threw a quick glance at Michael before sliding into the passenger seat. There was nothing casual about it. Every little motion, every look, they were too deliberate, too rehearsed. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Emily's phone buzzed with odd messages, and she'd answer late-night calls in hushed tones. And whenever Michael's car showed up, I'd catch these fleeting smiles on her face, ones that disappeared just as quickly as they came. One night, I saw her standing outside, nervously fiddling with her phone. Just as she was scrolling, Michael stepped out of his car, hesitating for a split second, almost like he was waiting for some unspoken cue. There was no way this was just friendly catching up, it had the precision of a well-practiced routine. I even remember a night when I spotted them together at a dimly lit bar downtown. They barely spoke, but their eyes did all the talking. A few stolen glances, hands clasping tightly for a brief moment, then a swift departure into the night. It was all too calculated. There was no mistaking it now, this wasn't some innocent reunion between old friends. Then came the moment that sealed it for me. I decided to follow them. I had no clue what I'd find, but my gut screamed that there was more to this than I wanted to admit. That evening, I watched as Emily and Michael left our house together. But instead of taking the usual roads, they weaved through quieter streets, heading further away from the heart of the city. I stuck behind them, keeping a safe distance. As we drove, the bright city lights faded, replaced by deserted, unfamiliar streets on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The further we went, the heavier the knot in my stomach grew. Eventually, their car pulled up in front of an old, run-down warehouse, one of those places that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling, the windows shattered, and there was a strange, eerie stillness about it. Michael cut the engine, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. The headlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, making everything look even more unsettling. Then, Emily stepped out of the car. Her movements were quick, tense, like she was in a hurry to get inside. Without so much as a glance behind her, she headed straight for the entrance and disappeared into the building. I parked farther away and moved in, my pulse pounding with every step. I had to know what the hell was going on. Carefully, I crept up to a broken window and peeked inside. The interior was dimly lit, just enough to reveal a maze of hallways stretching into the darkness. I squinted, trying to make out any figures or movement. My heart hammered against my ribs as I strained my eyes, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever was happening inside. And that's when it hit me, I had no idea what I was about to uncover, but the moment I tried to focus on what was happening, Michael and Emily disappeared into the winding corridors of that eerie warehouse. Standing there on the cold asphalt, my pulse thundered in my ears, and a wave of anger and disbelief surged through me. Everything I had seen, the perfectly timed arrivals, the secretive glances, the hurried departures, was beginning to form a pattern. This wasn't just old friends reconnecting. It was something calculated, something intentionally kept out of my sight. That night, as I drove home under the heavy Los Angeles sky, my mind refused to settle. The images of what I just witnessed played on an endless loop in my head. No matter how much I tried to push it aside, I couldn't shake the growing certainty that my wife was living a double life. Every small detail, the bright purple Chevy, the way she clutched her phone like it held a dangerous secret, the way she scanned the street before slipping into his car, everything pointed to a well-planned deception. My thoughts ran wild, trying to make sense of it all. There was no way this was some random string of coincidences. Their meetings were too structured, too precise. I spent the rest of that night replaying every moment, every fleeting look they shared, every quiet step she took toward him. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became, this was deliberate. This was betrayal. I knew I couldn't sit around stewing in my own thoughts. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence, before I confronted either of them. The weight of that realization pressed down on me, making it clear that my world was about to shift in ways I wasn't prepared for. The drive home stretched on, every mile filled with a mess of emotions, anger, sorrow, determination. I had stepped onto a path I never thought I'd find myself on, one that would force me to face a brutal truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. The feeling only grew stronger as the night wore on. I was standing on the edge of something disastrous, and there was no turning back. Fueled by that storm of emotions, I climbed into my old Ford and drove to the upscale neighborhood in western Los Angeles where Laura lived. Laura, Michael's wife. A woman I had always thought of as warm, friendly. But now, given everything I had seen, she was the only person who might have the answers I needed. The drive felt never-ending, the city lights blurring past me as my mind fixated on every detail, the sight of Michael's car parked outside my house, the way Emily's eyes flickered with something unspoken whenever he was near. My chest tightened with a mix of dread and determination. When I finally pulled up to her home, a neatly kept, picturesque house tucked into a quiet, tree-lined street, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, steadying my breathing. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out and made my way up the front path. Each footstep felt heavier than the last, as if I was walking toward something I couldn't take back. I knocked sharply. The sound echoed in the stillness of the suburban night. There was no time for hesitation, no time for small talk. I had come with a story to tell, a truth to lay bare, and I wasn't leaving until I had answers. The door swung open almost immediately. Laura stood there, her eyes widening slightly, not just in surprise, but in something else. Suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, cautious. Even behind her polite expression, I could sense an undercurrent of worry. She knew something wasn't right. I didn't waste a second. I laid it all out, Michael's repeated appearances, the exact timing of Emily's late-night exits from our house, the quiet, shadowed meetings in alleyways and dimly lit bars. "I've seen it, Laura," I said, my voice firm, steady, despite the storm churning inside me. "Your Michael is always around when Emily suddenly needs to step out. I've watched her face light up when his car pulls up, just for a second, but it's there. And it's too precise to be a coincidence." I told her everything, about the texts Emily kept hidden, the way they moved like two people following a script, the way it all seemed so rehearsed. Every little detail was a piece of the puzzle, and with each word, I could see the recognition flicker in Laura's eyes. She knew something. The question was, how much? I didn't hold back a single detail, not the vivid color of Michael's car, not the way he twitched nervously when he thought no one was watching, not the rigid precision of their carefully choreographed meetings. Laura listened intently, her slow nod signaling that my words were hitting home. The composure she usually carried now wavered, her eyes flickering between recognition and unease. "I've noticed something too," she finally admitted, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "Michael's been different. He dodges my questions, stays out later than usual. At first, I thought I was imagining things, just being paranoid. But now..." She trailed off, her expression darkening as the pieces started falling into place. The conversation was raw, stripped of any pretense. Our voices stayed low, urgent, in the hushed stillness of her tidy home. I was just about to push further, to ask the questions I dreaded the most, when a noise stopped me cold. A set of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A chill ran through me as the door behind Laura creaked open. And there he was. Michael. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those damn eyes, flickered around the room as if searching for something. Or someone. The air thickened with tension in an instant, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. Laura stiffened beside me, her hand trembling slightly as she fought to mask her shock. But there was no mistaking the sudden tightness in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled against her side. I had to move. I need to get out," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. My carefully planned confrontation was unraveling too fast, slipping through my fingers like sand. Without another second of hesitation, I turned on my heel and made a quick exit through the back. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs as I stepped into the cool night air, my breaths coming in short, ragged bursts. I strained my ears, listening for any movement inside, waiting for some sign of what might be happening between Michael and Laura. Minutes passed, stretching unbearably. Then, cautiously, I crept back toward the house. I stopped by a side window, the half-open frame allowing just enough of a gap to see inside. What I saw only made my suspicions grow stronger. Michael was moving through the house with purpose, his steps slow and deliberate. He wasn't just pacing, he was searching. His fingers ghosted over surfaces, checking pockets, flipping through papers with a quiet urgency, like a man on the hunt for a misplaced piece of evidence. A receipt? A text? Something incriminating? I watched, my grip tightening against the window ledge. His expression was calculated, his jaw set with quiet determination. Whatever he was looking for, it was clear, he was desperate to erase any trace of it. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. From my vantage point, I could see Laura standing stiffly, her back to me. She was speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Though I couldn't make out the words, it was obvious, she wasn't just playing along anymore. She knew. She knew something was wrong. Michael's behavior was a confession in itself. He might not have spoken a word, but his actions painted the story clearly enough. Every instinct in me screamed that this went deeper than infidelity. That we had unknowingly stepped into something far bigger than the betrayal of a marriage. This wasn't just sneaking around. This was deception on another level. I eased back into the shadows of the yard, my mind spinning, trying to assemble the pieces of the night. My plan had crumbled in an instant. What was supposed to be a confrontation had turned into something else entirely. But in the chaos, one thing had become clear. Laura and I were no longer just two betrayed spouses searching for answers. We were in this together. When our eyes met before I left, we both understood it without saying a word. There was more at play than we had ever imagined. And if we were going to find out the truth, we'd have to rely on each other. Once I was safely back in my car, I pulled away from her house slowly, my grip still tight on the wheel. But my mind? It was racing. I couldn't shake the image of Laura's troubled expression. The way she glanced at Michael when she thought he wasn't looking. The way Michael had moved through that house, as if covering his tracks. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just an affair. And I wasn't walking away from it. Not yet. At that moment, I knew, Emily's secret meetings were just the surface of something much larger. Michael was tangled up in something that went far beyond a simple affair, and the way Laura reacted only made that more obvious. That night, I sat alone in the back seat of my car, parked in a dimly lit lot, staring blankly at the steering wheel. My mind felt like a tangled mess, a maze of unanswered questions and half-formed conclusions. My conversation with Laura had cracked open something I wasn't sure I was ready to face, a Pandora's box of uncertainty. Who was really pulling the strings behind all these clandestine meetings? How deep did this deception go? And the biggest question of all, who was betraying who? I didn't have the answers, not yet. But one thing was clear, this was no longer just about my marriage. The stakes had shifted, and whether I liked it or not, I was in too deep to walk away now. As the night air settled around me, something else became clear. Laura and I had unknowingly become allies. We didn't need to say it out loud. It was there, unspoken but undeniable. We both wanted the same thing, to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. With each new piece of evidence, the puzzle grew more complex. Every late-night phone call, every secretive glance, every perfectly timed meeting, it all pointed to a deeper layer of betrayal that neither of us had expected. But there was one constant in all of this: these lies couldn't stay buried forever. Sitting there in the stillness of my car, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let this deception fester in the dark any longer. I had to face the truth head-on, no matter how painful it was. My home, my trust, my life, it had all been invaded by secrets. And I was done sitting in the shadows. The road ahead was uncertain, maybe even dangerous. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to ignore this any longer. After that tense meeting with Laura, we both knew we couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the truth to come to us. The next afternoon, we met at a small, no-frills cafe in downtown Los Angeles. The kind of place where no one paid attention to anything but their own problems. The chairs were scuffed, the walls faded, and a steady hum of conversation filled the air, offering us just enough background noise to speak freely. I laid out everything in front of me: pages of notes, detailed logs of every call, every late-night departure, every stolen glance between Emily and Michael. Laura sat across from me, scanning through the pages with laser focus, as if searching for something that would confirm what she had feared all along. "We need to connect the dots, and fast," I muttered, keeping my voice low but firm. I pointed at my notes. "Every time Emily leaves, Michael's behavior shifts. And you told me he stays late at your place whenever something unusual happens, right?" Laura nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Yeah. I've noticed him pacing in the hallway, constantly checking his phone. And the calls, he never tells me who he's talking to, but they always happen late at night, right after Emily is supposed to be home." I exhaled sharply, tapping my pen against the notebook. It's too much to be a coincidence. I flipped through the pages, running my finger over the timestamps I had recorded. "Look at this. I've tracked every time Emily steps out. It always lines up perfectly with Michael's movements, either his return home or those nights when he lingers at your place longer than usual. It's a pattern. A setup, maybe." The conversation was direct, no wasted words, no emotional detours. We weren't here to reminisce or to dwell on our own heartbreak, we were here to find answers. And with every new piece of information Laura confirmed, my resolve hardened. There was no time to waste. Every moment we spent waiting was another moment the deception continued. We needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable evidence. That very night, I put my plan into action. I got my hands on a small, discreet camera and carefully positioned it on the balcony of our house in Los Angeles. The goal was simple: track every movement without Emily realizing she was being watched. I adjusted the angle until it had a perfect view of the front entrance and a clear shot of the driveway. Nothing would escape its silent, unblinking eye. No more guesswork. No more assumptions. I was going to see the truth with my own eyes. While I focused on tracking Emily, Laura worked her own angle. She had a friend in security, someone who owed her a favor. Through that connection, she arranged for discreet surveillance on Michael's residence. We weren't just looking for vague clues anymore, we were compiling hard evidence. Every detail, timestamps, the color and make of every car that came and went, was logged with meticulous precision. And soon enough, our efforts started paying off. A few nights later, I was hunched in my car, parked beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, waiting. The house was still. Too still. Then, at exactly 11:13 p.m., Emily emerged from the front door, moving with an eerie silence. Her steps were controlled, deliberate, her eyes flicking around the darkened street as if scanning for something, or someone. She didn't hesitate. No second thoughts. She climbed into her car and drove off, heading toward the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Right then, Laura's phone buzzed. A message. Michael was missing, too. He hadn't come home on time. Instead, Laura reported, he was hanging around outside their house, pacing on the porch, his phone in hand. He wasn't just standing there, he was waiting for something. Glancing at his screen. Checking the street. His movements were controlled, too careful, like a man anticipating an event he already knew was coming. At that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't random. There was a method behind the madness. I started cross-referencing our notes. Every time Emily left, Michael's behavior shifted. Laura confirmed it. Whenever Michael stayed out late, Emily was missing, too. It wasn't just one night. It was a pattern. I logged everything, precise times, locations, even the smallest details. One night, I saw a dark blue sedan tailing Emily's car as she headed toward the warehouse. Another time, I recorded the sound of a car door clicking shut, just moments before she vanished into the night. Each detail sharpened the picture, and what I saw made my stomach twist. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just about stolen moments and secret rendezvous. It was something deeper. A coordinated effort. A plan. I spent hours combing through my footage. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Enough to see Emily stepping out, pausing just long enough to glance down the street before slipping into her car. Enough to see the way she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as if she was bracing herself. Laura's reports only made things worse. Michael wasn't just aimlessly wandering around at night. He was waiting. Expecting something, or someone. His movements were too structured, his timing too perfect. The more I observed, the more I was convinced, this wasn't just infidelity. It was bigger than that. Every detail fit too neatly into place. A shadowy routine, rehearsed and repeated like clockwork. The dark blue sedan, the synchronized absences, the hushed phone calls, it was all too precise to be chance. I started recording everything, down to the smallest noise. The clack of a shutting door. A hurried rustle, like footsteps moving quickly in the dark. Nothing about this was random. It was orchestrated. One evening, as I sat at my cluttered kitchen table, flipping through my notes and reviewing the footage, frustration boiled over. I clenched my jaw, staring at the grainy images on my screen. My pulse pounded. How could this be happening? I muttered the words under my breath, balling my fist and lightly slamming it against the table. This wasn't just about Emily sneaking around. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was the deception, the careful, deliberate way it had been hidden from me. Every small detail, every perfectly timed move, every secret exchange. It had been a well-constructed lie from the start. And worst of all, I was starting to realize that Emily and Michael weren't the only ones involved. There was someone else. A shadowy presence pulling the strings behind all of this. I grabbed my phone and called Laura. My hand was steady, but my voice shook. equal parts rage and resolve. "Laura," I said, forcing the words out, "this isn't just an affair. Look at how everything lines up, it's like a goddamn script. Every time Emily leaves, Michael stays back. Then there's always that follow-up, the dark blue sedan, the careful exits, the way they never leave at the exact same time. This is bigger than we thought." There was a pause on the other end. Then, Laura's voice came through, low and firm. "I've been thinking the same thing." Her tone carried the same weight as mine, the same growing realization that we were in over our heads. "And the worst part? We were just getting started." "I've been thinking the same thing," Laura admitted, her voice steady but edged with something darker, certainty. "My instincts were right about Michael. And now, with all these details lining up, it's clear, this is bigger than just an affair. It's a full-blown conspiracy." Her words hit hard, but I already knew she was right. There was no room for sentimentality in this conversation. No space for wounded pride or raw emotions. We were just two people, blindsided by betrayal, fueled by the same need to uncover the truth. And we weren't going to stop until we had every last piece of it. We agreed to push harder, to dig deeper. To find whatever it was they were hiding. I became obsessed with the details. Every night, I documented the exact moment Emily's car turned down an unfamiliar street. The precise second Michael's Chevy idled too long near the curb outside his home. I even noted the weather, the way the air smelled, the faint noises in the background, anything that might give me an extra clue. Each observation was another piece in the puzzle, slowly forming a picture that I wasn't sure I was ready to see. And the more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. Night after night, Emily would slip away, and Michael's schedule would shift in perfect sync. If Emily was out, Michael was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. More than once, Laura confirmed that on the same nights Emily disappeared, Michael was lingering at her house, coming home late, restless, on edge. This wasn't just two people sneaking around behind our backs. It was planned. Calculated. Every overlapping detail pushed me toward a single, unavoidable conclusion. Emily and Michael weren't just meeting each other. They were meeting someone else. A third person. A shadow figure, hidden in the background, orchestrating this entire thing. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity anymore. This was something much bigger. And I wasn't about to sit back and let it unfold without getting the full story. My nights turned into sleepless vigils. My days were spent rewatching footage, poring over notes, cross-referencing every suspicious movement. I wasn't content with theories. I needed hard, irrefutable proof. Every recorded moment was carefully logged, every whispered conversation analyzed. The weight of it all pressed down harder each day, suffocating, relentless. By the end of one of our late-night strategy sessions, sitting in my dimly lit study with only the hum of my computer for company, the truth settled over me like a cold realization. Nothing would ever be the same after this. The line between right and wrong had blurred, replaced by an overwhelming need to expose the lies that had consumed my life. With every new clue, I wasn't just uncovering a secret affair. I was uncovering a carefully constructed deception, buried under layers of misdirection and silence. And someone was working hard to keep it that way. Then, a breakthrough. Laura discovered that Michael had set up a meeting with her at his Hollywood home. The moment I heard, I knew this was it. My chance to finally gather undeniable proof. Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys, got into my car, and drove toward his house, my foot pressing the gas harder than I should have. Every mile I put between my house and his felt like one step closer to the truth. And one step closer to retribution. My thoughts spiraled as I gripped the wheel. Every image, every memory of Emily's stolen glances, Michael's calculated moves, their perfectly timed disappearances, it all fed the fire in my chest. I had been spiraling in this maze for too long. Tonight, it would end. Parking a short distance from Michael's house, I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness, my heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. My fists clenched and unclenched instinctively, my body tense with anticipation. I stared at the house, a small but tidy cottage tucked into an upscale Hollywood neighborhood. On the outside, it was the perfect picture of order. But behind that front door, I knew, the chaos of deception waited for me. I exhaled sharply, forcing a breath into my lungs. Then, without a second thought, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet night. I didn't care about appearances. I didn't care about being polite. I wasn't here for small talk or second chances. I was here for the truth. And I wasn't leaving without it. Inside, the house was unnervingly silent. I had expected to find Emily there, maybe waiting for Michael, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, it wasn't her I saw, it was him. Michael. He stood there, stiff and guarded, his eyes flickering around the dimly lit room with a tense, almost frantic alertness. His posture was defensive, like a man who had been bracing for this moment, already anticipating the worst. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then, something inside me snapped. "Michael," I growled, my voice low and edged with something dangerous. He flinched, but before either of us could think, the dam burst. The fight erupted in an instant. Fists flew, raw and unrestrained. The impact of each blow sent sharp echoes through the empty house, the dull thuds of knuckles against flesh punctuated by ragged breaths and the scrape of shoes against the wooden floor. This wasn't just a brawl, it was years of betrayal, suspicion, and pent-up rage unleashed in the form of violence. Neither of us held back. Somewhere between the blows, between the guttural grunts and the blind fury, Michael suddenly spat out words that froze me in place. "You're sleeping with my wife." The accusation hit like a slap, a sucker punch to my already battered senses. My reflexes fired before my brain could catch up. "That's rich coming from you. You're the one sleeping with mine." I shot back, my voice hoarse with anger. Our words bounced off the walls, bitter and laced with disbelief. And yet, even as we continued throwing punches, something about it felt off. As if, beneath all the fury, neither of us truly knew what the hell we were fighting for anymore. The room around us blurred, shrinking into the haze of raw emotion and unchecked aggression. Each strike was an outlet for pain, each swing a desperate attempt to reclaim something we had already lost. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Our movements slowed. Our fists hesitated midair before lowering altogether. We staggered back, both of us breathless, sweat slicking our skin, blood staining our lips. For the first time, we actually looked at each other. Not as enemies. Not as rivals. Just as two men caught in the wreckage of something far bigger than ourselves. A thick, heavy silence settled between us, heavier than any punch we had thrown. The anger, the blind need to prove something, it all drained away, leaving nothing but the realization that we had been playing into the very deception we were trying to unravel. I swallowed hard, my breath still ragged. "Michael," I muttered, my voice uneven, "what the hell are we doing?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he inhaled sharply, his eyes still burning with defiance but now tinged with something else. Doubt. Regret. As the seconds passed, the truth started sinking in. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about misdirection. A carefully orchestrated game of deception, and we had both fallen right into its trap. We had spent all this time believing that we were the ones being wronged, that our wives were the masterminds behind this entire web of secrets. But now, it wasn't so simple. Emily and Laura weren't just tangled in this mess. They might have been playing the same game, together. The thought was as jarring as it was undeniable. We weren't fighting over them. We were fighting because someone else had been pulling the strings, letting our anger distract us from seeing the bigger picture. Michael exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly as the weight of it all settled over him. I let my fists drop to my sides, the tension in my body finally releasing. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence between us said everything that I in that moment. It was undeniable. We weren't just two men betrayed by our wives. We were victims of something much bigger. For so long, we had been consumed by our own personal betrayals, blinded by anger, convinced that the people we trusted most had turned against us. But now, standing there in the wreckage of our assumptions, we saw the bigger picture. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone hidden in the shadows, orchestrating every move, twisting the truth to keep us looking in the wrong direction. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of it all pressed down on us as we stood in that dimly lit hallway, processing the bitter reality. The idea that Emily and Laura might be involved with the same unknown person was a truth neither of us wanted to face, but it was the only explanation that made sense. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate. Planned. A lie woven so seamlessly into our lives that we hadn't seen it until it was already too late. Our fight, our rage, had been misplaced, turned into a weapon against each other instead of aimed at the real threat. Finally, Michael broke the silence, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Maybe we've been looking at this all wrong," he muttered, his shoulders still tense but his tone resigned. I exhaled sharply, running a hand down my face as I tried to untangle the mess in my head. Every small detail from the past few weeks flooded back, the secretive glances, the carefully timed departures, the growing feeling that the truth was slipping further out of reach. He was right. We had been so busy chasing the wrong answers that we had failed to ask the right questions. As we stood there, the anger that had fueled us only minutes ago slowly drained away. What remained was the cold, unsettling realization that we had barely scratched the surface of whatever was going on. We couldn't afford to let emotions cloud our judgment anymore. This wasn't just about personal betrayal now. This was about exposing the truth. With a final, silent nod, we took a step back from each other, the tension shifting. Our rivalry, our anger, it didn't matter anymore. Not in the face of something far more dangerous than our personal grudges. The fight was over, but the war had just begun. Once I accepted that our initial accusations had been completely off target, Laura and I knew we had to go all in. We spent hours going over everything, every piece of footage, every recorded call, every little detail we had logged. Even the most seemingly insignificant things, like the color of the cars that appeared at just the right moments, were scrutinized. And then, the pattern revealed itself. Everything pointed to one specific location. A single house in the western part of Los Angeles. It was small, tucked away, barely noticeable. But according to everything we had gathered, both Emily and Laura had been making repeated trips there. There was no way this was a coincidence. Late one evening, as I sat hunched over my cluttered desk, Laura's voice came through the phone, tense and urgent. "Laura, every single record points to that address," I told her, my voice low and laced with frustration. "I've got exact timestamps of when Emily leaves, and every single one lines up perfectly with when you saw Michael loitering around. It's like they're both being pulled to the same place." Laura was silent for a beat, and when she spoke again, her voice was just as grim as mine. "I've been thinking the same thing. I know it sounds insane, but the evidence is undeniable. I even had a friend check out that neighborhood. There's nothing there, except that house. It's run down, looks abandoned. Like the kind of place someone would use for secret meetings." The pieces were falling into place, and what they formed wasn't just betrayal, it was something calculated. A setup. We had been searching for clues in the wrong places. The answers weren't in the late-night phone calls or the stolen glances. They were at that house. The next step was obvious. We needed to see everything. We weren't going to let this deception stay hidden any longer. Together, we mapped out our plan with surgical precision. I equipped my car with a hidden camera, setting it up in a way that gave me a clear shot of our driveway and the side streets Emily frequently used. If she was heading to that house again, I was going to catch it. No more guessing. No more theories. This time, we would have proof. Laura, using old contacts from her past in security, managed to pull a few strings. She arranged for discreet microphones to be placed near the entrance of that mysterious house. If our wives were meeting someone there, we were going to document every single moment, every whisper, every movement that could tie them to this secret rendezvous. For the next few days, we watched like hawks. I remember one night in particular. The air was heavy and still, as if the entire city was waiting for something to unfold. I sat in my car at a safe distance, my eyes glued to the tiny screen displaying the live feed from my hidden camera. The clock on my dashboard read 11:45 p.m. when I saw Emily step out of our house. She didn't hesitate. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, like a woman on a mission. She got into her car and drove off, heading straight in the direction of the private house. Then, at that exact moment, my phone buzzed. "I'm outside the target location," Laura whispered, her voice edged with tension. "I can see movement near the side entrance. Looks like someone's already waiting." I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse hammering. "Keep your eyes peeled," I said, my voice low. "I'm recording everything. We need every detail if we're going to expose this once and for all." A few minutes later, my screen flickered. The camera feed showed a dark silhouette moving toward the private house's side door. Laura's hidden microphones picked up faint noises, hushed voices, the soft rustling of fabric. Then, Emily's car pulled up. I watched as the door of the private house creaked open. My breath caught in my throat as two figures stepped out. Not just Emily. Laura. My stomach twisted. My vision blurred for a second as I tried to process what I was seeing. Laura, the woman who had stood beside me in this investigation, the woman who had seemed as blindsided as I was right there, walking in tandem with my wife. They were in this together. A sickening realization settled over me. They had never been on opposite sides. As the minutes crawled by, the mystery deepened. Through the dim light near the side entrance, another figure appeared. A man. Not Michael. Not anyone we had tracked before. His movements were careful, almost hesitant, as he approached the door. He clutched a small bag in one hand, and every few steps, he threw a nervous glance over his shoulder, as if checking for anyone watching. I zoomed in on the screen, trying to get a better look. The camera quality wasn't perfect, but it was enough. His posture, his wary glances, the tension in his body, everything about him screamed that he was the missing piece. Laura's voice came through the phone again, barely a whisper. "I'm hearing something," she said. "A conversation, but it's too quiet. It sounds like arrangements. They're planning something." A chill ran through me. This wasn't just another affair. It was a carefully coordinated meeting. My grip tightened around my phone. "Record everything, Laura," I muttered. "Every gesture, every word. We need to capture this in full." For the next hour, we documented everything. The hidden cameras caught Emily and Laura standing near the entrance, their body language calm, too calm. Their quiet conversation, the occasional glance over their shoulders, it was clear they weren't just meeting casually. And the man. The way he positioned himself, the occasional nervous laughter, the way his eyes darted around as if expecting to be caught, he was the focal point of this entire thing. This wasn't about cheating anymore. Our wives were colluding with the same man. When the meeting ended, the three of them dispersed into the night. I sat back in my seat, my breath slow and controlled, feeling a cold, calculated determination settle inside me. This was it. The proof we had been searching for. Every time Emily or Laura had slipped away into the night, it had led back to this house. Every perfectly timed movement, every coded glance, every hushed call, it all painted an undeniable picture of deception. I made sure to save everything. Every frame of footage, every snippet of audio. Hours later, Laura and I sat in silence, poring over every detail, dissecting each moment. We compared notes, timestamps, and confirmed everything against our logs. And when the full picture finally took shape, it was clear. This was never just about an affair. It was something else entirely. Something bigger. And we were finally about to uncover it. It was painstaking work, every detail logged with surgical precision. But as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, there was no denying what we had feared all along: our wives weren't just sneaking off. They were coordinating. Meeting with the same man. Planning these secret rendezvous with careful intent, ensuring every move was executed flawlessly. With the evidence in hand, our next step became clear. This wasn't just infidelity, it was something methodical, calculated. It demanded a response just as measured. The time for quiet surveillance was over. We had to confront them. I spent the night before day X preparing for the fallout that was sure to come. There was no scenario in which this ended cleanly. The weight of every secret, every deception we had uncovered pressed against my chest, thick and suffocating. But there was no turning back. We had what we needed. The man, the meetings, the proof. Everything was laid bare in black and white, ready to be used to reclaim our dignity and expose the truth that had ripped our lives apart. When the appointed day arrived, day X, I fired up my pickup, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The sky was heavy with thick, gray clouds, and a biting chill hung in the air. Fitting, I thought. The atmosphere matched the storm brewing inside me. Earlier that morning, Laura had called. Tonight's the night, she had confirmed, her voice unreadable. They're meeting again. Same time, same place. Every detail had been planned down to the second. This was it. With a steadying breath, I parked my truck a good distance from the house, tucking it behind a thick cluster of bushes that gave me a clear, unobstructed view of the property. From my vantage point, I could see the neatly trimmed hedges that framed the yard, the warm interior glow spilling through the curtained windows. Everything about the scene was calm. Too calm. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the house for movement. Then, there they were. Emily and Laura. They emerged from the side of the house in perfect sync, their movements eerily smooth, as if they had rehearsed them. No hesitation. No nerves. They were too comfortable in this. Too familiar with it. It was like the outside world didn't exist for them in that moment, only this private, hidden reality they had created. A slow, suffocating realization settled over me. The betrayal I had long suspected was now standing right in front of me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every instinct in me screamed to move. To intervene. To make them face what they had done. But I forced myself to stay put. This was the moment I had been building toward, the truth in its rawest form. I had to see it through. No more watching from the sidelines. I reached for my flashlight, heavy, solid, repurposed as a blunt weapon in case things went south. Then, silently, I slipped out of the truck and began making my way toward the house. I wasn't alone. Laura had confirmed everything. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I could feel her presence lingering in the background, the silent agreement between us louder than words. We were in this together. Every step toward the house was a step deeper into the heart of the deception that had unraveled our lives. Inside the yard, the setting felt surreal. Like something ripped straight from a low-budget film. Chairs arranged in a neat semicircle. soft lighting casting an eerie glow over the scene. A small table set with drinks. It was all too perfect. Too deliberate. Designed not just to invite, but to conceal. And then my eyes landed on it. A video camera. Positioned with precision. Its lens already trained on the gathering. Whatever was happening here. It wasn't just a meeting. It was meant to be recorded. I crouched low behind the dense foliage, my breath steady but my pulse hammering. Emily and Laura reached the entrance of the house, pausing just long enough to exchange a look, one that spoke volumes without a single word. Then, they stepped inside. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Their movements were fluid, too smooth, too familiar, like they had done this 100 times before. Every motion, every glance, felt calculated, rehearsed. I tightened my grip on my phone, whispering into the receiver. "It's time." Laura, hidden nearby, responded with a single sharp breath. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Without another word, we moved. I launched from my hiding spot, muscles coiled with years of pent-up rage and betrayal. Laura was right behind me. We surged forward, crashing through the shrubs, the cold air slicing through the heat radiating from our bodies. Inside the house, the world froze. Emily and Laura jerked around, caught completely off guard. The hidden camera continued its silent vigil, recording every second of the chaos unfolding. And then, my eyes snapped to him. The man near the door. A shadow in the background until now, but no longer. This was him. The third party. The orchestrator. The reason behind it all. I lunged. "Freeze!" I bellowed, my voice raw with fury. Before he could react, I grabbed his collar, slamming him against the wall. His eyes went wide, fear, shock, guilt, all flashing across his face in an instant. The night air was cold, but my anger burned hotter. Laura moved in fast, her presence commanding, unshaken. "You thought you could hide behind your lies," she seethed, stepping forward, her voice thick with betrayal. "Not anymore." The man stammered something, a weak, useless apology, but we weren't listening. Our fists did the talking. The attack was swift. Brutal. Years of deception, of dishonor, of unanswered questions poured out with every blow. This wasn't just a fight. It was justice. Through the haze of the struggle, I caught a glimpse of Emily. She stood frozen, her face lit by the harsh glow of a nearby lamp. Shock. Fear. Resignation. For the first time, our eyes locked. In that split second, something passed between us, not words, not accusations, just an undeniable truth. We had all been playing roles in this twisted game, all tangled in the same web of deception. But tonight, the lies ended. Enough. I roared, stepping back, my breath ragged as I glared between them, Emily, Laura, and the man still reeling from the ambush. I'm done. I'm done with the lies. Done with the deceit. My voice sliced through the tension like a blade, the culmination of every sleepless night, every hidden message, every stolen glance I had witnessed. Laura's expression hardened, her anger razor sharp. "You thought you could keep this charade hidden forever," she said, voice steady, ice cold. "Not on my watch." For a long, heavy moment, nobody moved. Laura and I stood side by side. The man trembled under the weight of our fury. And the camera, its lens still blinking, had captured everything. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every damn truth. Etched into the night with no way to erase it. "We're taking this evidence straight to court," I declared, my voice unwavering, leaving no room for argument. "By tomorrow, both of you will face the consequences. No more lies. No more betrayal. This ends now." My words cut through the cold night air like a final verdict, sealing the fate of those who had deceived us. And as the weight of what I had just set in motion began to sink in, a heavy silence followed. This wasn't just about a violent confrontation. This was the culmination of everything. Every suspicion. Every sleepless night. Every hidden truth finally dragged into the open. The man before us wasn't just a cheater. He was a manipulator. A puppeteer pulling strings we hadn't even realized were there, his deception weaving through every corner of our lives. I glanced at Emily. Her expression was a mixture of defeat and regret, her eyes cast downward as if she already knew that there was no coming back from this. Laura, on the other hand, stood firm, her face set in steely determination. No one spoke, but the message was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The truth, no matter how bitter or unwelcome, had finally been exposed. And the evidence, captured in those final, irreversible moments, was now the foundation of our pursuit for justice. This was the moment of reckoning. A moment that promised the end of the lies. I took a step back, letting the adrenaline in my system begin to ebb, my breath still heavy from the chaos that had just unfolded. "This is only the beginning," I muttered, mostly to myself. "The truth is coming out. And there's no turning back now." The words carried the weight of a new chapter. A chapter where deception would be met with accountability. Where betrayal would finally have consequences. But exposing the affair was only the first step. Laura and I weren't about to let this end here. We had uncovered something far deeper than just infidelity. There was more to this. And we were going to dig until we found it all. Determined to get the full story, to restore the honor that had been stolen from us, we hired Brian, one of the best private detectives in Los Angeles. Brian was known for getting to the bottom of even the most tangled scams, and the moment we handed him our evidence, he went to work. His investigation ran deep. He traced every suspicious phone call. He scrutinized bank transfers, searching for anomalies. He dug into even the smallest, seemingly insignificant details. And the deeper he went, the clearer the truth became. This wasn't just an affair. It was a scam. A financial deception. The man our wives had been meeting wasn't just their lover, he was orchestrating something bigger. Every new discovery made my pulse tighten, my need for justice inching closer with every file Brian unearthed. The betrayal hadn't just been emotional. It had been calculated. And now, we were going to bring the entire thing crashing down. With Brian relentlessly uncovering the depths of the deception, we knew we needed someone equally ruthless in the courtroom. That's when we brought in David Smith, a top-tier attorney known for his cold precision and merciless efficiency. David wasted no time. He began constructing our case with military precision, piecing together every fragment of evidence we had gathered. Surveillance videos from our hidden cameras. Witness testimonies from neighbors. Detailed bank statements. Electronic correspondences that exposed every calculated move. Nothing was left to chance. Every document was carefully catalogued, every fact airtight, ensuring that when the time came, there would be no loopholes, no denials, no escape. The truth would stand on indisputable facts. And with every page added to our case, the deception became clearer. The trial moved swiftly. David presented the evidence piece by piece, each revelation hitting like a hammer. Grainy, but undeniable, footage from our cameras. Recorded phone calls capturing the secret exchanges. Bank records mapping out the entire fraudulent scheme. The defense scrambled, attempting to counter our claims, but every argument they made was met with a harder fact. One by one, their denials unraveled. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't long before the jury reached its verdict. Guilty. The man who had infiltrated our lives, who had manipulated our wives, who had orchestrated the betrayal that shattered everything, was convicted of financial fraud and deception. The judge, seeing the full extent of his crimes, showed no mercy. A harsh sentence. Prison time. There was no escaping justice. When the trial finally ended, I felt an immense sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the lies were gone. The betrayal was exposed. In that courtroom, every twisted secret had been dragged into the light, leaving nothing but the truth behind. But there was still one final step. The painful, but necessary, process of divorcing Emily. And even Laura. The betrayals had cut too deep. There was no going back. Though the divorces were agonizing, they signified something more than just the end of a marriage. They were our liberation. A final break from the web of deceit that had poisoned our lives for too long. As I stood there, free at last from the weight of deception, I turned to Laura. We didn't need to say anything. There, in the silence, we acknowledged the truth. It had prevailed. And despite the scars of everything we had endured, we had won. For the first time in a long time, we had the chance to rebuild. Free from lies. Free from betrayal. Finally moving forward. Into a life defined by accountability, truth, and a hard-earned clarity.